In this section, we're going to finish looking at, discussing, thinking about the constraints on our lives that come from the inside and the outside. And in this case, we're going to look back outside of us at the structures that exist and that shape our thought, emotion, and behavior, that act as the strange attractors and the strange repellers, the pipes, the mountains, that we're unconsciously directing our lives through. A term that's often used for this is the environment. The environment. Now we're going to talk about the environment in a more general, abstract sense, and then we'll actually talk about the environment as it's used to describe our world today. But there's something peculiar that we humans have done that it seems no other species has managed to do. And that is to go from living in a quote-unquote natural environment that nature makes to living in an almost completely artificial environment that we created and designed. Desmond Morris wrote a book called The Human Zoo. He's famous for writing a book called The Naked Ape. And what he did is he talked about humans and described us behaviorally as just another primate species, and kind of objectively described what we do, called us the naked ape. That didn't go over too well with some folks who didn't want to see themselves as apes. But that aside, the profound idea that Desmond Morris had in The Human Zoo is that if you take animals out of their natural environment, their natural habitat, and you put them into a zoo, an artificial environment that constrains their behavior, separates them from their environment and each other, that they stop behaving like themselves. They stop behaving like animals. They become lethargic, apathetic, unmotivated, and they kind of just lay around all day and don't do much. You see where this is going? The human zoo. So we're the only creatures that make a zoo, and then we go there every night, get into the cage, and lock the door behind us. And then we call each other up on the phone and on Skype, and we go, wow, did you just read there's 41 million Americans that have depression? Huh, okay. We go on to discussion groups and blogs, and we write posts that say, doctors are prescribing antidepressants for everything now. I went in and hurt my big toe, and the doctor said, I think you need antidepressants. And we whine about it and we complain. It's really not that weird that we are becoming apathetic and unmotivated and depressed and lethargic and not acting like ourselves anymore. Did you ever think about how weird it is that we go out into the wild and catch animals, and then we build these artificial habitats that look to a human like the habitat that the animal came from? Right, with like the painted wall with the palm trees or whatever. And then we lock the animals in there, and then we pay to go in there and look at them. That doesn't strike anyone else as being a little weird? Okay. There's something in that if you just really think about it. Right? That we lock them in environments that look to us like their environment, but to them, not exactly, missing a couple of key elements. And then we go in there to watch them, look at them all day. Huh? And then we go back to our own zoo at night and lock the door. I think this is one of the most fascinating environmental factors to the kind of plight of the human chimp that no one is talking about. No one's talking about it. No one's thinking about it. No one's making a big deal about it. Everybody's pointing their fingers at someone else and what those bad people are doing to control us. So there's another side of the equation. That one might be thought of as like the physical side, the human zoo, the structure that we live inside of, the actual buildings, right? The hard stuff that we can reach out and touch. But there's another side of the human experience, environmentally speaking, that is now really coming online, okay? That's exponentially increasing, that I think is the one that has the potential to do the most damage. I think the human zoo's a challenge. This one, big deal. It's inundation. Inundation. Overwhelming amounts of interruption, distraction, stimulation, attention grabbing and pursuing that's coming in from the outside. I was just reading 100 years ago, I can't remember who it was, a real smarty, okay, someone very influential, said that the modern mind is not going to be able to deal with all the information it's going to have to deal with soon. We're going to need new models. And this was like 100 years ago when they said this, right? Al Reese and Jack Trout, one of my favorite quotes, right in the beginning of their book Positioning, they say, "We live in the world's first over-communicated society." And that was in 1980 that they said that. We live in the world's first over-communicated society. 1980. No cell phones, no internet, no email, no Facebook, no text, no Skype, no Twitter. So if we lived in the world's first over-communicated society, I mean, 1980 was, let me think, that was 1,000 years ago. Okay? I mean, relatively speaking, as far as information overwhelm and inundation go, right, between 1980 and now, that was probably a bigger leap than 1,000 years before it. Okay, so maybe it was more like 5,000 years ago. We're talking, thinking dog years here. Okay? Yeah. It'll do a little different math. So what's the problem with inundation anyway? What's the big deal there? I don't know. Okay, so a lot of people are calling me. I get a lot of email. Well, the problem with it is that our mind evolved in a time, our brain evolved in a time, and the structures that allow us to do minding or to mind evolved in a time, in an environment, and to accomplish things that are now almost irrelevant. And so now all of those strengths in this new context are becoming weaknesses, and smart people called corporations are taking advantage of our innate mechanisms to get our investment and our money and getting us to consume their stuff. So there are two sides to this coin. One is our mind's great power is the ability to direct and focus its attention. Okay? Our mind's great power is the ability to direct and focus its attention. Our mind's great power is to direct and focus its attention. What does the inundation do to that? It fragments it. Okay? Lots of incoming information on all channels fragments our ability to direct and focus our attention. Because instead of directing our attention is being called, and instead of focusing our attention is being pulled from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. The story that we tell ourselves is, I'm a multitasker, I'm a parallel processor, and I'm good. Tim Ferriss wrote a great article on his blog, which cited a newspaper article that talked about this experiment that was done, and it showed how multitasking, like using your BlackBerry and being in a conversation, lowered your IQ on average more than smoking pot. Right? So, getting our attention called all the time and then having it fragmented, it not only, this was an insight that I got from Tony Schwartz, it not only distracts us, right, and kind of calls and fragments our attention, but it leads to us losing the ability, losing the muscle of directing and focusing our attention. We literally lose the ability. Muscle's gone. It's kind of like kids using spell check all the time, lose the ability to spell. Right? The fragmenting and the calling of attention, we're losing our ability to focus. And our great power in life comes from directing ourselves and focusing in big blocks, uninterrupted, one thing at a time. Marshaling the whole thing on one thing over a long period of time. Peter Drucker talked in The Effective Executive about working in focused blocks of uninterrupted time of at least hours, minimum hours. The real power comes when you put a whole day on one thing, and then you do multiple days per week over a year on one thing, and then multiple years of a life on one thing. The idea of focusing on one thing uninterrupted, no distraction, no email, no cell phone, nothing buzzing, beeping, just solitary focused or in collaboration with others for an hour, it's like a joke now. It's almost like what, are you not in touch with reality? The inundation, the cost of it is dramatic. We've now seen the emergence of a new phenomenon, a new psychological phenomenon that's called continual partial attention. Okay, continual partial attention. And what happens is that the brain splits off. This just started happening in the last few years. The brain splits off a whole part of its resources, and it's constantly vigilant and like plugged into the network. There's a new phenomenon that's emerged very recently also called disconnection anxiety. There's a new anxiety that we're starting to have whenever we're not connected to a cell phone, text message, internet connection, right? We're not plugged in. We feel anxiety. Am I going to be able to be plugged in where I'm going? I got to always worry about, am I going to be able to get my email? Disconnection anxiety. Okay, so continuous partial attention. Where now a whole bunch of our resources are always just listening for, is someone calling? Is God on the phone? Is that emergency happening at home? And disconnection anxiety, where we're always worried, I might get disconnected. And then all of our attention is fragmented. And instead of directing our own attention, taking the wheel consciously and building that muscle, it's getting called all the time, so we're just kind of letting go. Okay, it's a very complex challenge. And it's probably not going to get a lot easier in the future. That's one side of the coin. The other side I mentioned earlier, don't think that this is all going unnoticed by the powerful. Don't think that this is escaping the attention of those that have lots of resources. If you've ever kind of studied how marketing is done, there's a great book that you might want to check out about this topic by my friend Jeffrey Miller. It's called Spent. And it's about kind of sex, evolutionary psychology, and consumer behavior. In the book, he made a leap that I think was just huge, right? It's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, but I didn't quite put it all together. And he said, business is probably the most powerful force that we've ever discovered. But more specifically, marketing is the most powerful force. And marketing has changed in nature kind of slowly as it's evolved, but it's become something that it didn't used to be. We think of marketing as, most people think of marketing as, well, I write an ad and I tell you about how great my product is and then I run it in the newspaper. Or I make a TV commercial and I tell you about how great my stuff is and you'll want to buy it and I put an 800 number on there. Well, now marketing has become, literally it's become a science. And as much money as is spent on any kind of science is now spent on marketing. And so what huge multinational corporations can afford to do is hire the smartest minds with the fastest computers and the best data crunching and round up the human chimps and put them into controlled environments and go out to their environments and just let them do what they do and watch for all the patterns that no one is seeing. And then, instead of having to talk people into stuff, they just make the product so it fits what the human chimp, instant gratification, short-term thinking, move away from ideas, fears, addictions, whatever. They just custom make the whole thing. So all they really have to do is hold it up and say, hey, want one of these? And they put it at the, in the counter at the checkout aisle at the supermarket at eye level. And everything just does itself, does its own work. I'll tell you, over the last several years as I've built an internet company, see, I come from offline world. I used to work in the real estate and mortgage industry offline. And we would write advertisements, and you'd have to design the ad and lay it out and get it to the magazine or the paper weeks or sometimes months before it ran. And then to respond, right, the person who was responding would have to pick up a telephone and call, and you'd have to have someone there tracking how many people called and making sure that they got the right tracking, and then you'd have to go back and analyze, well, I wonder what worked and what didn't. It was very kind of laborious in a way. When I started my internet business and I saw that I could make a change online, and over the next 2 hours, I could see how it was doing compared to the other one that I had before. I mean, there was like a giant light bulb that went off over my head that was like the size of the sun. Okay, it was like the fusion version of the light bulb. And I thought, okay, this used to take months to do, and now I can do this in 2 hours. I can learn faster than anyone right now, and I can test things out, and I can iterate, and I can just find what works. So do you really think that, and let's just use these concepts loosely, right? I mean, I've got a little business compared to really large organizations. We do a little bit of testing, but compared to what some businesses that I know of are doing, I mean, we look like slackers. But do you really think that a human being who has a need that comes up every once in a while that they need to fill, and who, when they need it, they go online and they go looking for information about it, or they go into a store, do you think that they can compete with the process of some billion-dollar company doing iterative scientific research and testing to create the thing so that when the human chimp sees it, the human chimp goes, oh, that's what I need right now. Is there any contest there? I mean, is that even in the realm of a fair fight, so to speak? No. And do you think that it's going to get more fair over time? No. No. Now, are they the bad guys? I used to think so when I was, when I was poor and didn't know anyone that was in that realm. But now I meet a lot of these people and I hang out with them and I talk to them. You know what? These are good people. These are solid human beings for the most part. Sure, for every, every group of people, there are always a couple of rotten apples. There's always a Bernie Madoff here and there running around in the group. But I find these people mostly, the really successful ones that are running the big companies, I find them to be evolved, sensitive, developed people, usually good family people, have done a lot of internal work. Oftentimes they've studied philosophy, psychology. They're part of civic groups. They contribute. They're integrated into their communities much better than average. And the organizations that they run, from their perspective, are really working to help customers get what they need. That's what it looks like from in there. That's what it looks like. But from out here, when you're an individual human, and you weren't trained, you didn't come to the Wyatt Woodsmall and Eben Pagan program and even get a fair view of what's happening and what you're up against and learn to deal with it at all. And you're not just dealing with one company and one instance of this, but essentially your whole life now is one of these after another, and they're kind of coming at you, and they're woven into everything that you enjoy. Environment. This is out there stuff. Is it some evil plot to destroy us all? I don't think so anymore. I think it's just kind of what emerges. Just evolution doing its thing. One more that I'll mention here, because I think it's a key just for us to look at and consider. Environment out there that affects us in here. The food that we put into our bodies. The food that we put inside of our bodies. I have to say, personally, this is just my own personal perspective, but when I talk to smart human chimps, and people that should know or should have looked into it a little bit, almost no one knows anything about the food that they're eating, where it came from, what's in it, what was done to create it, what the cost was on the environment. We have no idea. Okay, very, very rarely do I meet a person who can even really have a semi-educated conversation about it. And even worse, like 1 in 10 of those has any idea what the difference is of the effects that different types of food have when they put them into the thing called the body. They don't know how they interact. They don't know how the chemicals work and how our body breaks the food down, how it converts it into things like proteins and fat, nutrients, energy. We don't know how that works. And that one to me is really curious. Like I can't even make that one work in my mind that no one wants to know. I can't even figure that one out. What I think it is, what I'm guessing, is that the food companies and the food industries and the lobbying groups and the special interest groups and whatever are so savvy and so powerful. Some of the research I've done indicates this to me. They're so savvy and so powerful that they've gotten their stories into the cultural meme level. They've got it so wired that we question food and where it came from and what it's doing to us about as much as we question the word "the." So those are some of the challenges that we're dealing with environmentally. Some of the magnets that are pulling on us and pulling on the chimp, right? Pulling our conscious mind, pulling our will in many different directions. We're not even trying to, get complex here, but special interest groups, corporations, those that are really savvy, they've figured out how to go even deeper. They're not just trying to affect our conscious minds. They're figuring out how to put the magnet on the DNA level. So they're pulling on stuff inside of us that's beneath our conscious mind. Right? They're manipulating the whole system in their interest. Again, just evolution doing its thing, but I think some awareness around it and maybe some interest in it could help a little bit in getting some different results. And I think that covering our eyes and plugging our ears and see no evil, hear no evil, and putting our heads in the sand, I think it is a great strategy for achieving average results in life and being able to point our fingers at a lot of other people and say they're bad. And with that joyous, inspiring conversation, I give you the eminent Dr. Woodsmall.
Thank you, Mr. Pagan.
You are actually Dr. Reverend Woodsmall. We'll have to talk about the Reverend part later.
The Right Reverend Doctor.
Oh, the right?
Yes.
That's good. I like that.
Okay, so Evan's been talking about environment, and that we all live in an environment, and so we need to look at the environment in which we live. And we live in a macro environment and we live in a micro environment. So let's focus a little on the micro environment. Where is your home? Where do you live? And is that a place that's supportive of you, or is it a place that's disruptive of you? Since our goal is to use our mind and our brain in order to create success, is the environment you're in conducive to allowing you to get success? And if not, then this may be one of the places we want to begin to start making the changes that will put you in an environment in which you can function in an optimal way. You can function physically, you can function emotionally, you can function mentally. And in your environment, then who are the people that are in your environment? Who are the people that you interact with on a daily basis? And what is the nature of that interaction? Is it supportive of what you want to be, or is it a disruption? What environments are you attracted to? Are you happy where you are? Is there somewhere else you would rather be? Are you happy with the people you're with? Or there's somebody else you would rather be with? All of these are factors on the micro level that affect us daily and that are incredibly important if we're going to be able to start, which we're going to be moving toward, to start creating conditions that are allowing us to succeed. So first we need to look at this. Normally we don't even think about it. It's just a given. We live in a context, so all our behavior, one of the things we say in NLP, is all of your behavior is contextually dependent. And so what is context, though? Context means three things: when, where, and under what circumstances. So where is normally the environment maybe we think of, a space in which we live. When is another dimension. And the dimension of when are we most productive? When, at what time are we most functional? At what time then are we going to be most likely to be able to manage our mind in order to create the conditions we need to bring about the success we want. So also think of yourself first in the realm of space. And we've already said, are you comfortable with where you're living? Is that where you want to be? And not just the physical environment, but also the people that are there, the people you interact with on an ongoing basis. And then what times are you most comfortable? Where are there times that you're more productive, and you need to be aware of what these times and this temporal component are? Because there's all sorts of research that our body goes on body rhythms, and our body operates in 90-minute cycles. And at one point during the 90-minute cycle is when we're most clear, and at another point is when we're least clear. At one point we're most euphoric, at another point we're most depressed. And so it's a question of, once again, increasing awareness and starting charting these things and bringing them into your awareness. Now, context is when, where, and under what circumstances. So circumstances change in life. Circumstances change in life. And under the first thing to look at the simplest level, is that normally our behavior changes in two directions. So we have a way we normally are. We have a way we move under stress, and Evan talked a little bit about some of the things that happen under stress. And the Tim Ferriss analogy or something about we lose our brain power under certain conditions, and it would be similar to using marijuana. And so the question is then, where do we move under stress? And what effect and impact does that have on us? The other is that we frequently move in a different direction under intimacy. So we'll meet people and we'll go, well, how the hell could anybody live with that person? Well, they don't live with that person, because the person we're meeting is the person normally or under stress, whereas under intimacy, when they're relaxed, they become something totally different. So you need to, once again, observe yourself. Observe yourself. How are you normally? Where do you go when you're stressed? How does your behavior change? And where do you go under conditions of intimacy in which you're most comfortable, and how does your behavior change? And so everything begins with self-awareness. Awareness of our environment, awareness of where we're living, awareness of the times we function most appropriately, and awareness of the conditions or circumstances in our life in which we're most productive and we're most likely then to be able to use our mind to create conditions for success. Okay, another thing is then, we've talked about focus, and I mentioned Hugh Facey's statement that first things first, second things not at all. So what is the enemy of focus? The enemy of focus is distractions. The enemy of focus is distractions and interruptions. Those are the enemy of focus. And some of the distractions and interruptions are internal, and some of them are external. So we can turn off the cell phone, we can turn off the computer, and maybe have this anxiety, separation anxiety that Eben was talking about, but we can control some of the external distractions. There may be some you can't control. So if you live in a family, if you've got a baby in your house, if you've got animals in your house that fight with each other, then there's going to be certain things that you may not have control over. But what about the internal distractions? And what does it take then to be able to focus awareness on one point? Eben was talking about that one of the things is we need to be able to focus awareness for long periods of time, days and maybe even a day a week or something for a lifetime, because in order to bring about change, energy needs to be focused at one point. Energy needs to be focused at one point. One of the most important keys is persistence. Persistence. I do a lot of training in the sales world and modeling of super successful salesmen. And one of the main keys is they're persistent. They keep at it. So we were talking about these distractions. So some of the research indicates that we've got 7 to 9 chunks of attention. So attention is not infinite. Attention is not infinite. We've got 7 to 9 chunks, and that's for a normally intelligent person who's on a normally good rest. Actually, it's 7 plus or minus 2, so it's like 5 to 9. Now, some people, that 5 to 9 chunks of attention goes down to 1 or it may go down to -1 or 2. And if you've trained people with negative attention, then you've got some idea what that's like. So at our best, we can only pay attention and be aware of 5 to 9 things simultaneously at once. And anything more than that, then we begin to become on overload. And so Evan said one of the things that we do is we learn to filter out, and that Reese and Trout talk about the whole thing is we're an overcommunicated society. So what we do to deal with that overcommunicated society, where we're constantly bombarded for things competing for our attention, is we put them in categories. That's the mind's defense system, is categories. And we put them in number 1, number 2, and everybody else. And of course, Reese and Trout talk about if you're everybody else, forget it. So you've got to be either top of the mind association. The battle occurs in the customer's mind. And it occurs where the attention is, and it occurs then who they category that you're put into. So we've got everything competing, as Evan said, distracting us in all certain ways. We've only got 5 to 9 chunks of attention. And so we have to be guardians of our awareness and guardians of our attention and guard against those things that are going to distract us. Now, as we said, the things that distract us or interrupt us come from without, but also they come from within, and those are probably the most dangerous ones. So one of the biggest distractions is that, and Evan was talking about multitasking, one of the biggest distractions has to do with these parts that we talked about earlier. Part of me wants this, a part of me wants that. We live in a society in which generally we've been indoctrinated to believe that the more options and the more possibilities we have, the better. So we're always looking for more options, more possibilities. And we think that quantity makes up for quality. It's not how many options you have, it's what is the best option. It's not how many options, it's what is the best option. So having a huge number of options actually is a danger. It's not a blessing, it's a curse. Because all of these options dissipate energy, they pull us in different directions. Energy needs to be channeled, it needs to be focused. First things first, second things not at all. We have to prioritize. We have to prioritize, which means some things have got to be more important than others. And then we've got to guard that. So it's what we're doing and we're not doing what we need to be doing that's the problem. It's what we're thinking and we're not thinking what we need to be thinking that's the problem. Because at that moment, then that's more important to us than what we need to focus on. So distractions are everything that pulls us in different directions, and possibilities pull us in different directions, and we try to multitask and do a number of things at once. Whereas the evidence is that we need to focus on one thing and put energy behind it and channel the energy like an arrow moving through the air until we hit the target. So distractions and interruptions. Then what are the interruptions we have from within? So part of the problem too is we've got these parts that are coming and going. We've got the things that are pulling us in different directions. We've got the internal interruptions. Things in our internal dialogue, pictures that flash into our mind, changing states, going to sleep, all sorts of these things. Sleep, not in the sense of falling asleep, but simply losing awareness. So all of these things cause us to lose awareness, and our awareness is captured, as Evan said, and dispersed. And we need to bring it back together. We need to continually collect and focus awareness. And now another challenge is the world we're in is continually changing. And we talked about that, and we'll continue to talk about that. If we lived in a static environment in which everything was fixed, then it would be a different story. Now, the human mind and the chimp brain was originally designed to live in a limited environment where it was pretty much sameness and pretty much repetitive, and that's what we're designed for. But that's not the environment we're living in. That's not the world we're living in. That we're living in a world of continuous change. And the continuous change then can create stress, it creates anxiety, it can create fear, it can create depression. But nevertheless, that's the way it is. So the ancient Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Well, many of us do live in interesting times, and it's interesting because we're in a world that's continually changing. Now then, what happens when we live in a world that's continually changing? Then part of our awareness needs to be alert for signs of change. We need to be able to try to detect the patterns and trace the patterns to things, see where things are going. Now then, so if we're going to try to create then conditions that are going to lead to success, we need to be focused on what that success is. We need to be aware of the variables that are going to attract us and pull it towards us and allow us to move toward that and pilot our plane in that direction. And we got to be aware of all the turbulence and all of the winds and temperature variations and everything that's going to blow us off course and take us in the other direction. So to do that, we've got to monitor the environment. We've got to set up monitoring for the environment. So in the most sophisticated form of this is what's called scenario planning. So what we do is we ask the question, okay, this is where I want to go. What might prevent me from getting there? And what other things might then suddenly spring up and that might affect or impact the ability to get to where I want to go? And so we call these alternative scenarios. And then once we got the alternative scenarios, we've got to set up monitoring devices. This allows us to know what we need to check in and pay attention to see if the world may be changing. And if some of these, for each of the scenarios, we got certain triggers that allow us to know that it's not just a possibility, that it's now a probability. And when these triggers are fired, we have to go out and look and monitor. And when the triggers are fired, then we need to realize that the world is changing in that direction. So once again, this makes things much more difficult than when we're living in the jungle under static conditions, or we're living on an island in the South Pacific where basically we've got all of the food we need available to pick off the tree. When the world is changing, then we've got to be continually alert for signs of change. In order to do that, that doesn't happen by chance. It happens by purpose and by focus and where to put our attention. And so if we begin to do this, then we can begin to anticipate. So we've gone through a lot of structural conditions here, inside us and outside us. And we've talked about some of these processes that are involved. And now these things, then now we're reaching the end of kind of we're reaching one stage of our journey here. And we are now beginning to understand the terror of the moment, the terror of the situation. And only when we are realistic and accept the terror of the situation, then can we begin to now take all that into account and then now begin to focus on how we can use the mind in order to get and succeed in the ways we want to succeed. So this is where we are up to now in the journey, and we'll have another exercise here that will allow us to wrap this piece together. Okay? As well we should.